My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 67, a widow. For the past 3 years, the only place that has ever felt like home has been my mountain cabin in Telluride. My late husband Thomas and I poured our hearts into that house. Every beam, every window, every nail carried a part of us. The 3-hour drive had never felt long before, but that afternoon, it stretched endlessly. I carried only a small weekend bag and the chipped ceramic mug Thomas used every morning. The rim was cracked, yet I had never let it go. It was my anchor. When the cabin appeared through the pines, my chest eased, the same way it always had when Thomas was alive. But the moment I pulled onto the gravel driveway, laughter drifted across the porch. Laughter that didn't belong to me. I froze halfway up the steps. My son Matthew lounged in the very chair his father had cherished. The wooden rocker Thomas had sanded himself one summer, the one he drank his morning coffee in. Matthew had an ankle over his knee, a glass of red wine in one hand and his phone glowing in the other. Beside him, his wife, Vanessa, crossed her legs like a model in a magazine spread, her polished hand swirling her wine. Behind them, Vanessa's parents, Robert and Claire, reclined as though they had been born on that porch, completely at home. 4 glasses for bodies all at ease. My throat tightened. In a single glance I was caught between 2 times. A flash of memory. Thomas laughing one crisp morning, steam rising from his cup as I poured tea into it, his hand resting on that same chair arm. "Evie," he had said, "this will always be the spot where I wait for you to bring me tea." Back to the present. Matthew filled that sacred space with a smirk. He met my eyes, unflinching. His voice was calm, precise, rehearsed. "Mom, you're not allowed here anymore. This is their house now." Each word landed like a hammer. For a moment the air itself felt thin. Richard's chair, Richard's porch, Richard's home, all consumed by Matthew's casual dismissal, as if decades of love and sacrifice meant nothing. That line, "You're not allowed back," split my life into before and after. The thumbnail of this story is true. My son handed my $4 million mountain cabin to his in-laws. It's theirs now. You're not allowed back. And do you know what I did? I smiled. Slowly, deliberately. The kind of smile that fools people into thinking they've won. But inside I had already written the ending. Because the night they tried to take over, I had a legal surprise waiting. People might call what I did that day silence or compliance. I call it something else. The day they would never forget. I gripped my weekend bag until my veins burned. My lips held the smile. My eyes held ice. And without a word, I let them believe they had erased me. That was the hook. And if you stick with me, I will show you how quiet strength can redraw every boundary. Before we continue, if this story has already grabbed you, subscribe, hit the bell and like this video. It helps more than you know. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. I want to see the faces behind the voices in this faceless world. Because what unfolded on that porch was only the opening act. By the time this story reaches its last page, you'll understand why silence can be sharper than any knife. The drive back to Denver stretched longer than the usual 3 hours. The highway was still, but inside my car the quiet felt heavier than air. No music, no hum of Thomas tapping the wheel in his usual rhythm. Just me and the echo of Matthew's words. "You're not allowed here anymore. This is their house now." My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles burned white. The chipped ceramic cup rattled softly against the seat beside me, a loyal companion on every journey since Thomas died. Tea, never coffee, always tea. The crack along its rim caught the sunlight, a jagged line that felt like a map of my life's fractures. The road stretched endlessly. Pines blurred into asphalt, mountains flattened into plains. Each mile marker pressed against me, a reminder that I was being forced further away from the only tangible piece of Thomas I still had. I tried to steady my breath, but memory barged in uninvited. Thomas on the porch, his hands rough from sanding wood, smiling as he said, "Evelyn, this cabin will outlast us. It will carry our story." That promise had once been a comfort. Now it felt like betrayal. By the time Denver city lights appeared, I felt hollowed out as if Matthew had carved me into a shell, leaving only the body of a woman carrying a weekend bag and a ceramic cup. Pulling into my driveway, I saw the same pale blue house Thomas and I had bought 40 years ago. Outside it looked unchanged, familiar. Inside it was a cavern. Too still, too shadowed. The hall light flickered before holding steady. A faint scent of lavender cleaner lingered, the brand I always used, but it no longer whispered home. It smelled like a waiting room. I set my bag on the bench and carried the cup into the kitchen, placing it beside a framed photo of Thomas smiling at the cabin, the lake glittering behind him. Sunlight kissed his hair, his grin effortless as though life had frozen in perfection. I stared until my chest tightened. My phone buzzed on the counter. I hesitated, wishing it would just sit there in silence. But it was a text from Matthew. Just so you know, they're moving in permanently next weekend. Don't come back. No hello. No explanation. Just absolute finality, carving me out of the life I had built. I sank into the kitchen chair Thomas had always claimed for his morning paper. The phone burned in my hand as I stared at the words until they blurred. Don't come back. I whispered them aloud and the sound startled me. Then, alien. The first stab was humiliation, my own child declaring I no longer belonged. The second was grief, a second death of Thomas echoing through me. But beneath the shock ran a steadier current, resolve. I lifted the cup, tracing the crack with my thumb. Thomas had never replaced it despite my offers. A crack doesn't mean it's broken, he once said. It just means it survived. Survived. The word anchored me. I could survive this too. My tears refused to come. Instead, I felt my body sink, rooted like stone to the chair. My mind began to tally. The cabin deed still in my name, the living trust Thomas had made sure we signed years ago, the receipts for every repair I had managed since his passing. A quiet calculation, a slow gathering of power. I was far from finished. I understood that Matthew might think he had won by raising his voice, but I held the documents that spoke more quietly, and far more forcefully. The clock ticked past 9 and I hadn't eaten all day. Food didn't matter. I poured hot water into the chipped cup and let the steam curl upward, though I never brought it to my lips. It was more ritual than sustenance, a small act that reminded me I was still here. The house stayed quiet. For the first time I welcomed it. Tonight the silence was the anchor I needed. I thought of Matthew as a little boy, chasing leaves in the cabin yard, calling for Thomas to watch him climb the rocks. I remembered Thomas at his graduation squeezing my hand and whispering, "We did right, Evelyn. He's going to be a good man." Those memories felt like a family that had dissolved, replaced by strangers sitting on my porch with their wine glasses. The text from Matthew still glowed on the counter. I flipped the phone face down. My reflection in the screen startled me. Older, sharper, colder. Maybe that was the woman I needed to be now. I carried the cup to the sink, washed it carefully, and dried it with the dish towel Thomas always left hanging slightly crooked. I placed it back on the top shelf as if that small gesture restored balance. I walked through the hall, past photos of weddings, birthdays, vacations, snapshots of a life that now felt like a postcard from a world I could no longer visit. I paused at my study doorway. Thomas's books still lined the shelves, his notes scribbled in the margins. I touched a spine lightly and whispered, "I'm still here and so is the cabin." When I climbed into bed, the house sang its usual night song. The furnace thrum, the subtle creak of the wood, the hum of the refrigerator. But I no longer heard emptiness. I heard witnesses. I held on to a single truth. No one, not Matthew, not Vanessa, not her parents, could erase me. No one could take my name off my own home. Morning came pale and gray, the kind of light that hesitates on a house. I woke before the alarm, grief nudging me awake. I padded to the kitchen, filled the kettle and set the chipped cup on the counter. The crack along its rim caught the first strip of sunlight. I watered the basil on the sill, then moved down the hall with a spray bottle to mist the ferns. Routine anchored me. Plants ask nothing of you. I carried the tea to the living room and placed it on the saucer beside Thomas's empty chair. The rocker faced the window, angled perfectly to watch the street, the sky. I never sat in it. I dusted it, oiled it, left it ready as though a good man might walk through the door and reclaim his spot. I took the sofa and pulled a throw over my knees. The cabin felt like a song paused mid-note. I opened the blinds. A delivery truck rattled past. I sipped my tea and let the warmth settle me. I had spent 30 years managing books, nursing a husband through chemo, learning how to sleep alone. I could do mornings. Still, silence has teeth. By 9, I had watered the philodendrons, wiped the counters, scrolled through recipes I never cooked, folded dish towels the way my mother taught me. I opened the cabinet where I kept the documents. The deed, insurance, the living trust. My tea cooled as the past came alive. Memory keeps records and mine came in invoices. Tuition, repairs, sacrifices. I remembered Matthew at 18, grinning under his graduation cap in the gymnasium's harsh light. The aid office called about a shortfall. I wrote a check I could barely afford and told myself it was a gift. Thomas squeezed my hand gently and said, "You do love clearing the path for him." I smiled and replied, "It's what mothers do." He pressed a kiss to my temple and murmured, "You spoil him." The wedding planning had been Lydia's family's dream. Crystal chandeliers, sweeping views. I told myself it was a once-in-a-lifetime moment and paid the deposit before anyone could stop me. Matthew hugged me tightly and whispered, "You're the best," before checking his phone and letting go. Thomas glanced at the invoice and shook his head with a quiet smile. "You spoil him too much, Evelyn," he said. I laughed, filed the receipt into a folder I called Joy Ledger and moved on. The winter after Thomas passed, Matthew's car broke down in the middle of a snowstorm. He called at midnight, voice taut with worry. I drove him to work for a week, then co-signed for a used SUV sturdy enough for the icy roads. "I'll pay you back," he promised. I told him it was fine. "You're a lifesaver," he said. I believed him. The payments never came. Still, I kept the paperwork like a lullaby tucked into a drawer, a quiet proof of care. When Lydia and Matthew had to move suddenly because their landlord sold the building, I wired the deposit for the new place without seeing it. I told myself this was how families avoid falling off the edge. Hanging up, I looked at Thomas's chair and whispered, "I'm trying." The room didn't answer. My hands were steady as I watered the potted fern, setting the can down carefully. Truth arrived quietly without fanfare. I had thought if I gave enough, Matthew would understand that family isn't a ledger. I was wrong. The realization didn't crush me. It cleared the fog. Relief came first, thin, clean, precise. Then a calm anger, the kind that straightens your spine without noise. I stood in the doorway and took in our history. Photos on the mantel, the chair I refused to sit in, the chipped cup that refused to break. I had been writing checks to preserve a sense of family, and in doing so, I had been overdrawing my own dignity. A notification blinked on my phone. I ignored it. In the study, I opened the file drawer and pulled out the living trust binder. My fingers traced the embossed letters, learning a new alphabet. Evelyn Harper, Living Trust. A promise we made when love was medicine and foresight, a quiet form of tenderness. I placed the binder beside the cup on the table. I thought of the cabin, the morning sunlight spilling across the floorboards. I thought of Matthew's voice on the porch, Vanessa's satisfied smile, and the way Robert and Claire had leaned back as if I were staff. I thought of the text, "Don't come back." I placed my hands flat on the warm wood and said the word out loud, letting it settle. Not a scream, not a speech, just ink and intention. I am not the type to storm in. I am the ledger type, the list maker, the woman who keeps her house steady. I can be gentle and still say no. The world once told me those qualities could not coexist under one roof. The world was wrong. I rinsed the cup and straightened the dish towel. The morning, once empty, now felt like a clearing, a space for new choices. Tuesday night, the cabin cameras lit up on my tablet. I had installed them last year, more to track raccoons than people, but now they carried a different gravity. At 8:45 I tapped the living room feed. The image was grainy but I could see clearly. Matthew and Vanessa had returned to the cabin without telling me. Matthew paced near the fireplace, hands moving sharply. Vanessa sat on the sofa, legs tucked under her, a glass of water balanced carefully in her hands. Her voice, low but cutting, carried across the room. "They have nowhere to go, Matthew," she said. "My parents are drowning. They've lost their apartment. They can't afford the city rent. You know that." "I know," Matthew said, running a hand through his hair. "But this isn't the way." Vanessa leaned forward, her tone sharp. "It's the only way. Look around you. This place sits empty most of the year. Your mother doesn't even stay here. It's selfish to leave it locked when people we care about are struggling." My chest tightened. Thomas and I had built that fireplace stone by stone. To hear it called wasted space felt like hearing our lives dismissed. Matthew stopped pacing. "She won't agree, Vanessa." She fixed him with a hard look. "She will. She doesn't know how to say no. He always gives in. College tuition? Paid without hesitation. The wedding? Sign the checks. The car, the condo, everything. She's trained us to expect it." Matthew's shoulders sagged. "Maybe this time is different." She shook her head. "It's not. She's a widow, Matthew. Alone. She won't risk losing you. You're all she has. She'll swallow her pride. He always does. Alone. Widow. Swallow her pride." The words hit deeper than I expected. They had reduced me to a simple equation. Grief plus obligation equals surrender. Matthew rubbed his face. "What if she calls a lawyer? What if she locks us out?" Vanessa shook her head. "She won't. She doesn't think that way. He puts family first, even if it breaks her. We just have to be firm. Tell her it's permanent. My parents deserve this." I wanted to speak to the screen to remind them of what I had done for them, of who built the life they stood in. But the camera only listened. Matthew whispered something, barely caught by the microphone. "She'll hate me if we do this." Vanessa laid a hand on his arm. "Not if you frame it as helping. We're giving them stability. Your mother has more than she needs. She'll understand eventually." He nodded, but his face told the truth. Guilt weighed him down. He wasn't built to carry it. I closed the tablet slowly. The house around me was quiet, but inside 2 worlds clashed. One saw Matthew as a boy who still needed shelter. The other was the woman who had been told she wasn't welcome at her own door. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the chipped cup. The steam was gone, but the faint impression of Thomas's hand hovered near the handle. I could almost hear him say, "You spoil him too much, Evelyn." Maybe I had. Maybe every yes I gave had paved the road to this. But Vanessa's words lingered. Her parents had lost everything. They were desperate. I pictured Robert stiff on my porch, Claire with her pearls trembling slightly as she held her glass. Were they victims of misfortune or architects of entitlement? Did need excuse intrusion? It was a moral tangle. If they were truly without a home, if desperation pushed them to Matthew's doorstep, what kind of woman was I to guard my own house so fiercely? Could compassion and self-respect coexist? The easy choice was what Vanessa predicted: surrender. Let them stay, call it generosity. The harder choice was truth. This wasn't about shelter. It was about control. They had chosen force, not request. They had declared ownership, not asked for help. I pressed my palm to the table to steady myself. For years I had believed love meant sacrifice without limits. Tonight, watching that feed, I saw the flaw. Sacrifice without respect breeds entitlement, not gratitude. The knot did not untangle, but a clarity pulled at me. Vanessa might think I would fold. But I already knew I would not. Matthew might want to believe it too. But belief does not bend the law, and the law was where I would stand. The question lingered in the quiet rooms of the house. If I deny them, am I cruel? If I allow them, am I erased? The camera had shown me more than their plan. It had revealed their reasoning, their certainty, and it forced me to confront what kind of justice I believed in. I finally rose, the floorboards groaning under my weight. My answer was not yet fully formed, but my resolve was. The lodge was more than a building. It was memory, labor, love, survival. You do not hand that over like it's a set of spare keys. I moved to the window, pulled back the curtain, and looked at the darkened street. Somewhere in that night my son believed I would bend again. Somewhere, Vanessa rehearsed her certainty that compassion meant surrender. But in this quiet house with Thomas's photograph watching me, I allowed the first dangerous thought to take root. Maybe this time they were wrong. Downtown smelled of rain on hot pavement the morning I carried the binder into Margaret's office. Her nameplate still read Margaret Cole, attorney at law, the same brass I had stared at with Thomas when we first signed our papers years ago. The waiting room had a ficus that had survived more recessions than I could count and a stack of magazines no one touched. I sat quietly for a moment, smoothing my breath. My tote was at my feet and inside it rested the chipped ceramic cup. I rarely brought it anywhere, but today it was a talisman, a reminder of who I was. Margaret opened her door with a half-smile that mixed warmth with business. We had been friends since college, surviving cafeteria coffee, first jobs, and young mistakes. Her legal mind, however, was always as sharp as a scalpel. "Evelyn," she said, ushering me inside. "Let's see what we are working with." I placed the binder on her mahogany desk and opened it to the tabs. Deed, trust, insurance, taxes. She put on her reading glasses and reviewed everything in silence, the quiet feeling almost protective. Pages turned, pens scratched notes, and then she nodded, slow and certain. "This trust is ironclad," she said. "Title to the lodge is properly vested in the Evelyn Harper Living Trust. You are the trustee. You hold the authority to exclude anyone who is not a guest." Thomas signed as co-grant, and his interest merged into yours by design. "Everything is clean." Relief moved through me, subtle and deep, like the first breath of morning. I did not smile. I pressed my palm flat on the binder and let the steadiness anchor me. Margaret continued, brisk and clear. "We will prepare a certification of trust and record a memorandum with the county. Any officer who encounters the property will have instant clarity. We will send formal notice to Matthew, Vanessa, and her parents, Robert and Claire, making clear they have no right to occupy. Certified mail, return receipt, no trespass warning included. If they enter, you may call the sheriff and request removal under criminal trespass. You will not change locks while anyone is inside. You will not touch their property. We will ensure everything is precise so there can be no claims of harassment." I nodded. Rules steadied me. I have always thrived under rules. She set her pen down and looked at me, not as a lawyer now, but as the friend who had once brought me soup the day Thomas began chemotherapy. "The law will protect you," she said softly. "But the law is not where your son will fight. He will fight here," she tapped my chest, "in your heart. He will tell you you are alone. He will say you are choosing strangers over family. He will bring up holidays, future grandchildren, what he thinks you owe him. He will accuse you of being unkind." I stared at my hands. They were steady. My throat was not. "He will try to make your heart override your signature. That is the only place he has a chance." I slid my tote closer with my foot, letting my fingers trace the curve of the cup's handle through the canvas. I didn't pull it out. I held only the thought of it, the anchor it always gave me. "What do I say?" I asked, imagining his voice pressing on me. "You say it once, and you repeat it as many times as necessary," Margaret replied. "You say, 'I love you.' The answer is no. This property is trust property. I will not discuss it further. Repeat. Do not explain. Do not defend. Do not bargain." She leaned forward, her eyes serious. "Silence is not surrender if it protects a boundary. It is a tool." I let that settle. Silence. A tool. I had long used silence to avoid conflict. Now I would use it to draw a line that could not be crossed. Margaret flipped another tab. "We will create a log. Save every text, every voicemail. Record dates and times of all conversations. If they return, call the sheriff first, then call me. And Evelyn, if you feel yourself weakening, call me before you call anyone else. I met her eyes. I will. She softened. Grief rewires us. It makes yes feel like the only way to hold people close. But proximity bought by surrender is not closeness. It is control. I heard Thomas in that sentence, the teasing echo I had once loved. You spoil him, Evelyn. Back then I had called it love. Maybe I still did, just a little. I traced the emboss on the binder with my thumb. I used to think love meant saying yes, I whispered. The words felt steady, even. Now I think love needs a line. Maybe love is the line. Margaret smiled with her eyes, not her mouth. She stood and pulled a short stack of papers from the printer. Sign here to authorize me to act on behalf of the trust with third parties. I'll file today. By week's end the record will be public. Post a small sign at the lodge. Private property, trust estate. No trespassing under Colorado revised statute. Not required, but it helps deputies. I signed where she pointed. My hand did not shake. She slid the copies into a folder, then closed the binder and patted it like a doctor closing a chart. One more thing, she said. Expect a performance. When people lose leverage, they raise their volume. Do not mistake volume for authority. I exhaled a small laugh, without humor but with relief. And you are still here, she said. Bring that cup of Thomas's when you need courage. The one you think I don't know about. I blinked. She had seen it once at my house years ago. I nodded. It helps. He walked me to the door. You are not cruel, Evelyn. You are clear. There is a difference. I paused in the hallway, looking at my reflection in the glass. Same face, new set to the shoulders. I tightened the strap of my tote, feeling the weight of the cup again. Ordinary and sacred all at once. Outside, the sky had opened into a pale, tender blue. I stepped into it with my folder and my plan. The lodge was more than boards and stone. It was memory and labor, and the part of me that refused to be erased. The law would guard the door. My quiet would guard the rest. I used to think love meant saying yes. Now I knew it meant drawing a line and keeping it. 2 days later, I found myself knocking on Ethan Miles's door. He lived 3 houses down, a low ranch with a white mailbox scarred by winter storms. Ethan had been a soldier. Now he worked as a security systems engineer. More than that, he was a man who owed me a debt he had never forgotten. Years ago, when a pipe burst in his basement and left him ankle-deep in freezing water, I had called a plumber I trusted and refused payment. He never let me forget it. When the door opened, he stood there in worn jeans and a t-shirt, glasses sliding down his nose, the glow of 3 monitors reflecting in his eyes. "Evelyn," he said, a careful smile on his face. "Everything all right?" "That depends," I replied. "I need your help with a project." He stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. His living room looked like the inside of a control room. Cables, routers, and soldering kits spread across a workbench. The soft hum of electronics filled the air like a second heartbeat. "What kind of project?" he asked, folding his arms. "The kind where a house needs teeth," I said quietly. "Not to bite anyone, just to remind them they don't own what isn't theirs." His eyebrows lifted, then settled into a grin. "Now you've got my attention. Which house are we talking about?" "Pie Lodge," I said. "The one Thomas and I built in Aspen. My son thinks he can give it away." He whistled low. "You're kidding." "I wish I were," I admitted. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "All right. Tell me what you want the lodge to do." I hesitated. "I don't want it to be a haunted house. I don't want it to punish people for sport. I just want it to defend itself. I want anyone who enters without my permission to feel unwelcome enough to leave. I need the house to speak when I cannot be there." Ethan nodded slowly, already sketching ideas in his mind. We can do discrete cameras with remote feeds, motion sensors tied to lights that strobe in a way that makes anyone pause, speakers to broadcast warnings, legal notices, sheriff's department references, even plumbing triggers for faucets or showers. And if you want atmosphere, footsteps, door creaks, subtle enough to make it feel alive. The word struck me, alive. The lodge had felt asleep since Thomas passed. Maybe it was time it stirred again. I don't want it cruel, I said. I don't want it mean. Just capable like me. He tilted his head, studying me. You've always been capable, Evelyn. He just forgot. Maybe the lodge can remind you. I brushed the rim of the chipped cup tucked in my tote and allowed myself a faint smile. That weekend we drove up together. Ethan's SUV was packed with gear. Small black cameras, LED strips, motion sensors no larger than smoke alarms, and a tablet to control it all. The road curved through the pines, thick with late summer dust. I gripped the wheel, recalling the last time I had pulled into the drive and seen Matthew lounging in Thomas's chair. My stomach tightened, but I kept going. When we arrived, Ethan stepped out and took a long, careful look. It's a fine place, he said. Let's make sure it stays yours. Inside, the air still carried the scent of cedar polish. I moved through the rooms while Ethan unpacked, tracing the outlines of the life Thomas and I had built. The mantel we had carved our initials into, the kitchen drawer that always stuck in damp weather. He followed, placing devices in corners and testing angles. This one covers the porch, he explained, holding a small camera. Anyone sets foot here, you'll see it on your phone in real time. Motion sensor over there. Triggers the lights to flash red and blue like police strobes. No one stands still under that. In the kitchen, he rigged the faucet so that when the sensor tripped, water would roar with startling force across the stainless steel. Upstairs, he positioned a projector to cast tall, shifting shadows along the hallway wall. As I watched, I realized the lodge would no longer be silent. It would be awake. And so would I. Doesn't matter if you know it's staged, Ethan said. Your body reacts anyway. He finally opened the tablet. Here's your control. Everything. Cameras, lights, motion sensors. There's a backup system too, so nobody can just cut the power. I stood in the entryway as he ran a test. Lights flashed, strobing sharply enough to make spots dance in my vision. A calm, firm voice boomed through hidden speakers. Unauthorized entry. Colorado Revised Statute 18-4-502. Leave immediately. Water roared from the faucets. Footsteps echoed from speakers tucked in corners. A shadow projected across the hallway moved as if someone paced deliberately. Ethan shut it down and grinned. Now your lodge has a brain, and maybe a little attitude. I looked around the familiar rooms, the rug straight, the curtains drawn, yet it felt different. It was no longer just wood and stone. It was awake. Could answer when I could not. I don't want it to frighten anyone unnecessarily, I said softly. I just want it to protect itself the way I'm learning to protect myself again. Ethan nodded. Sometimes defense is just a reminder that you're not powerless. As we packed up, the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting copper light over the lake. I stood on the porch, watching the water shift in quiet waves, mountains behind it standing like silent witnesses. Thomas used to sit here, tea in hand, telling me the lodge would outlast us. Now it could do more than survive. It could defend. I slid the chipped cup from my tote and held it for a moment. See, Thomas, I whispered. She's got teeth now. And so do I added. The lodge stood behind me, silent but awake. That night the quiet pressed in, heavy and alert. Denver streets hummed faintly outside, but in my kitchen, only the clock above the stove marked the passing time. 11 past midnight. I brewed tea, though I knew I wouldn't drink it. The chipped cup rested on the table beside a yellow pad of paper and a pen that had belonged to Thomas. For 3 years I had avoided this ritual, writing to him. Tonight I needed a voice to hear mine, even if it was only paper. The small lamp by the table cast a soft amber glow, pooling across the pad. Everything else dissolved into shadow. I sat, pen in hand, staring at the blank page, fingers trembling. Thomas, I wrote and paused. His name alone made my throat tighten. I forced myself to continue. Thomas, tonight I did something I have avoided for too long. I said no to Matthew. I told him the lodge is not his to give away. I remembered the look on my son's face, as if he could push through me like a wall. But this time the wall held. The pen scratched steadily, though my hand shook as I wrote the word no. The ink pooled slightly, darkening the margin. They do not see me as a mother anymore, Thomas. To them I am a wallet. Every check I wrote, college, weddings, condo, car, I told myself it was love. I told myself it would keep them close. But tonight I saw clearly, it was not love they saw. It was currency. They expected the lodge to be just another transaction. But it isn't. It's the mornings you sat in your porch chair waiting for me to bring tea. The wood you sanded by hand. The place where grief and peace still meet. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it, darkening the edge of the page. I set the pen down and pressed my palms flat on the table, willing the tremor in my fingers to calm. The clock ticked on, indifferent. I picked up the pen again, knowing tonight was not just for words. Tonight the lodge would be armed. With Ethan's careful guidance, she had eyes and ears now. Sensors, lights that flashed, speakers that spoke the law, faucets that roared awake. She would not be taken quietly. Neither would I. Felt strange, Thomas. Like giving the house a mind of its own. But maybe that was what I needed. A reminder that walls can protect, not just shelter, and that I must protect myself as well. I paused, pen hovering above the paper, letting the quiet stretch. The lamplight glinted along the crack in my cup, a thin line running from rim to base like a scar. It had survived falls, yet it still held liquid. I traced the crack with my fingers as if it could understand. Then I wrote the final lines. If you were here, you would tell me not to bend so far that I break. I'm trying, Thomas. I am learning to stop bending. I am learning to stand. The lodge will stand too. I signed only with my initial, E. It felt right. A full signature is for others. An initial is for the heart. For a long moment I stared at the page. The ink gleamed under the lamp, and the word no seemed almost alive. My hand ached from the grip, my shoulders slumped, but my chest felt lighter. I folded the letter carefully, each crease deliberate, and carried it to the hallway closet. On the top shelf sat the old leather album Thomas and I had filled with photographs from the lodge's early years. I slid the folded paper between pages scented faintly with cedar and dust. It will stay here with you, I whispered. Closing the album, I let its weight anchor me. Back in the kitchen, the amber glow of the lamp still painted the room. I turned it off, letting darkness settle, save for the faint outline of the cup. I carried it to bed like a talisman, proof of everything I refused to lose. Under the quilt, the letter's words replayed in my mind. Not anger, not vengeance, just truth I had hidden too long. Saying no was not cruelty. It was survival. It was love shaped with a boundary. The silence of the house felt different now, not heavy but steady. I realized I had written more than a letter to a husband. I had written a promise to myself. No one has the right to erase my name from the door of my own home, not even my son. The phone rang on a Tuesday evening, just as the sun dipped behind Denver's skyline, turning the windows to mirrors. I knew before I picked it up who it was. Matthew's number glowed across the screen like a warning. For a moment I let it buzz, hand hovering. Then I pressed answer. Mom, he said, no greeting, no softness. His voice had that clipped edge. The one that always implied the end of discussion was already decided. We're moving into the lodge Saturday. With or without you. I drew in a steady breath. The chipped cup sat on the kitchen table, half filled with cold tea. I wrapped my fingers around it, letting its weight steady me. Matthew, I said, calm but firm, you don't own what you didn't build. He snorted softly. I'm not doing this for me. Lydia's parents need a place. They've lost everything. You have space, they don't. It's just common sense. He said it as if charity could be measured in columns, like my life could be balanced like a ledger. Common sense, I realized, doesn't erase deeds. I set the phone to my ear and heard Matthew's voice, sharp and insistent. Mom, we're moving into the lodge next weekend. You can't stop us. I held the chipped cup in both hands, letting its weight ground me. The lodge is held in trust. It belongs to me, I said evenly. He shifted instantly, the way he always did when logic blocked his path. Mom, you don't even go there anymore. It just sits empty. Why hold on to it? I felt the familiar burn in my chest, but my words stayed calm. The point isn't yours to question. It's mine to decide. He pressed harder. Dad would have wanted us to use it. He always said family comes first. I let the silence settle like a heavy curtain. Knuckles white against the ceramic, I said slowly, do not speak for your father. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. Matthew recovered first, his tone sharper now. You're being selfish. I almost laughed at the accusation. After decades of giving, of filling every need, of writing every check, the word felt absurd. I gave you an education, I said softly. I paid for your wedding. I bought your first car when yours failed. I signed for your condo deposit without a question. That was love. Love does not give you the right to take what isn't yours. This isn't taking, he shot back. It's family. Family's share. Family's sacrifice. I provided for you, Matthew, I said with the calm he hated most. I do not provide for them. Vanessa's parents are not my family. I barely know them. Silence fell again, sharp and taut. Then he tried a different tactic. If you resist, you'll lose. We're moving in and there's nothing you can do. I let his words hang in the air, shrinking them to their proper size. Yes, I can, I said. He sputtered, disbelief rising. You think you can stand in our way? I don't need to stand in your way, I said. My voice was level, final. The law already does. Desperation crept into his tone. Mom, don't do this. Don't make it harder. You'll embarrass yourself. For a long moment I realized the relief. I had spent years fearing that very thing, losing his approval, risking the last tie to Thomas. But sitting there with the phone pressed to my ear, I understood. The embarrassment belonged to him, not me. I'm done talking, I said. My hands were steady, my chest unburdened. You're not in charge anymore, he shouted. Not over me, not over this. I did not rise. I did not argue. I did not soften. I pressed the red button. The line went dead. I stared at the black screen, the faint reflection of my face staring back. My heart was steady, my breathing even. It was such a small act. A click, a choice, but it felt monumental. For the first time I ended the conversation first. I set the phone down beside the chipped cup. Steam no longer rose from the cold tea, but the kitchen felt alive, charged with a quiet energy. The walls seemed to hold their breath. I whispered to myself, small maybe, but I took my power back. I sat in the stillness, letting the silence stretch without apology or backtracking. Just the steady quiet of a woman who had finally said no, and meant it. The clock ticked on. The house settled. Outside, a car passed, then disappeared into the night. I lifted the cup, drank the bitter tea, and let it remind me. Some things grow bitter if left too long, but you drink them anyway because they teach you not to wait. For years I had let Matthew set the terms. Not tonight. Tonight I set my own rules. I wrapped my hands around the chipped cup and leaned back in the chair, eyes drifting to the ceiling. The paint was peeling slightly, the light fixture flickered. It was nothing serious, fixable things. But this boundary I had drawn was neither small nor negotiable. It was absolute. It was Thursday evening when the knock came. Insistent. The kind that carried anger before a word could even form. I already knew who it would be. My hand hovered on the doorknob as the faint aroma of simmering stew drifted from the stove. When I opened the door, Matthew stood on the porch, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. Vanessa was at his side, arms crossed, her perfume cutting through the winter air like a warning. They looked like a small army ready for confrontation. "Mom," Matthew said, voice clipped, "we need to talk." He didn't ask, he commanded. I stepped aside, letting them enter the hallway. The air thickened as the door closed behind them. Vanessa's gaze swept the room, calculating. Matthew didn't waste time. "This has gone far enough. Either you stop opposing us or you'll never see us again," he said. "No holidays, no visits, no grandchildren. Nothing." I felt the old fear rise. The fear that had kept me writing checks and biting my tongue for years, but it no longer ruled me. I looked at him, then at Vanessa, and my voice remained calm. "Family," I said slowly, "does not hold property hostage." For the first time that night, Matthew blinked. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. Silence fell, thick and deliberate. "You're twisting this," Matthew said finally, his tone softer but still urgent. "We're just trying to create stability for Vanessa's parents. Isn't that what family does?" I tilted my head. "Stability isn't built by taking someone else's foundation. If help was what you needed, you could have asked. Instead, you demanded." "That's not family," I said. "That's extortion." Vanessa's frustration showed as she stepped closer. "You don't understand what we're facing," she said sharply. "My parents lost everything. They have nowhere else to go. And you sit on a lodge worth millions, barely using it, and you call us selfish." Her words hit with the sharpness of truth, but only partially. I met her gaze evenly. "I understand loss. I buried Thomas. I understand emptiness. I live with it every day. But generosity is not the same as surrender. And need is not entitlement." Matthew stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the hardwood floor. "So that's it. You choose a house over us." I felt my pulse steady. "No," I said. "I choose dignity over manipulation. There's a difference." He exhaled sharply, frustration etched in every line of his face. "Keep this up and don't expect visits, calls, or anything from us." The words swept through the hallway like a gust of cold wind. My throat tensed briefly, that old reflex wanting to plead, bargain, or soften. But I stood firm, grounded in something stronger than fear. "Then that is your choice," I said quietly. "But do not dress it up as mine." Seconds passed, heavy and deliberate. Vanessa shifted first, tugging at Matthew's sleeve, whispering something urgent. He hesitated, caught between insistence and retreat, before finally stepping back. I watched them leave, the door closing with a muted click behind them. The silence returned, warm and steady, carrying the weight of a house and a woman who had finally learned how to stand. His eyes stayed fixed on mine, searching for any sign of weakness, any flicker of doubt. But there was none. I held my ground until it was Matthew who looked away first. He yanked the door open with a sudden force that rattled the frame, letting in the icy winter air. Vanessa brushed past me, muttering something under her breath, and he followed, his steps heavy and deliberate. From the doorway, I watched them descend the porch steps, cross the driveway, and slide into their SUV. Neither glanced back. The engine roared to life, tires skidding slightly on the gravel. Then they were gone, leaving only the dim red glow of taillights fading into the night. I stayed by the door a moment longer, feeling the cold air against my skin and the solid weight of the wooden threshold beneath my feet. For years, I had entered their lives like a supplicant, chasing approval, gratitude, even fleeting affection. Tonight the truth hit me. This was my door, my threshold. I had the authority to decide who passed over it. I stepped back and closed the door gently, leaning against it as the house seemed to breathe with me. Warm air from the vents carried the faint scent of the stew I had left simmering, filling the room with a sense of quiet victory. They had tried to convince me that love could be bargained, that family could be negotiated like property. Standing there, I felt the truth settle in, clear and unwavering. Family does not take someone's home as a given. I whispered to the empty room, almost to myself, "I've crossed my own line. I'm not going back." The words felt final but not bitter. They carried weight, strength. I carried the chipped cup into the living room and sank into Thomas's old chair, the one Matthew had once claimed as his own at the lodge. I set the cup on the side table and folded my hands in my lap. My pulse slowed. My breath steadied. For the first time in years I felt whole, unyielding, and at peace. Outside the world could rage. Inside I had already made my choice. Saturday arrived with a crisp chill in the air. I was in my Denver study well before dawn, the chipped cup warm in my hands, the tablet open and feeding live images from every camera Ethan had installed at the lodge. Porch, entryway, living room, upper landing. I knew each angle by heart. What Ethan had jokingly called teeth, I thought of simply as armor. At 1:57 p.m. the feed lit up. A dark SUV turned onto the gravel drive, sending pine needles skittering in its wake. I set the cup down and braced myself. Matthew stepped out first, moving with the air of someone who assumed nothing could stand in his way. Vanessa followed, sunglasses perched high on her head, issuing curt directions as though orchestrating a small army. Robert and Claire emerged slowly behind them. Robert carried a large rolling suitcase, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the lodge as if claiming territory. Claire clutched a floral overnight bag, scanning the porch like she was measuring boundaries. "Bring the big one inside first," Vanessa commanded, pointing toward the door. Matthew nodded and hoisted another bag. They climbed the steps together and Claire's hand rested on the doorknob. That was the moment the lodge responded. The porch lights snapped to life in flashing staccato bursts of red, white, and blue. Robert froze mid-step. Claire recoiled, jerking her hand back as if she'd touched something scalding. Then came the voice, clear, calm, and unmistakable through every speaker. "Attention! Unauthorized entry detected. This property is protected under Colorado Revised Statute 18-4-502. Leave immediately." Colorado Revised Statute 18-4-502. Unauthorized entry. Leave immediately. Claire screamed and her floral bag tumbled from her hands, scattering scarves across the porch. Robert lunged to steady her but Vanessa barked, "Ignore it. It's just theatrics." Matthew shoved the door open, dragging the first suitcase into the house. The lodge responded instantly. Faucets in the kitchen burst to life, water gushing with a force that rattled the cabinets. Upstairs, the projector cast a tall, uneven shadow across the hallway wall, like a figure pacing just beyond vision. Hidden speakers filled the air with deliberate footsteps echoing from the stairwell. Claire clung to Robert's arm. "Someone's upstairs," Robert muttered, squinting through the flashing lights, jaw slackening in disbelief. "Don't panic," Matthew growled, though his own eyes flicked nervously toward the ceiling. "It's staged. She's bluffing." The faucets shut off abruptly. Silence settled for a heartbeat, then the voice returned, sharper and more commanding. "Trespass documented. Law enforcement notified." Claire's knees buckled. Robert wrapped his arms around her, guiding her backward. Vanessa's hand trembled as she gripped her phone. "Call the police. Now," she hissed. Through the live feed I watched Matthew's confidence falter, replaced by careful calculation. He fumbled for his phone and started dialing. Minutes later, headlights washed over the gravel driveway. A county patrol car rolled in, lights spinning but sirens silent. Two officers stepped out, boots crunching on the stones, hands resting near their holsters as they scanned the scene. I leaned forward, fingers wrapped around the chipped cup, its cool surface grounding me. One officer approached Matthew first. He launched into a flurry of gestures and loud explanations, while Vanessa's voice cut in high-pitched and defensive. Robert tried to steady Claire, who shook and murmured about the voices and shadows. Finally, the officer raised a hand. "Enough." His voice was firm and measured. "Do you have documentation proving any claim here?" Matthew fumbled, producing nothing but words and bravado. Vanessa waved her phone like proof, but no official papers accompanied it. The officer knocked on the front door. Ethan had prearranged access through the system, and instantly the lodge calmed. The strobes ceased, faucets fell silent, shadows vanished. The house reverted to its peaceful self, a mountain retreat, orderly and secure. The officer stepped inside briefly, scanning the rooms, then emerged, shaking his head. House is secured. Nothing illegal. No malfunctions. Just a well-designed system performing its function. Matthew pressed forward. It's ours. Mom barely goes up there. We're entitled. Stop. The officer cut him off. From his clipboard he produced a folded document. The notarized, county-registered living trust one had filed with Margaret. This property is held in legal trust under Evelyn Harper. You have no claim. Sole authority rests with her. No ambiguity. Matthew's mouth opened, then closed in stunned silence. Vanessa paled, fingers digging into her palms. Robert's gaze fell to the suitcases he had hauled onto the porch. Claire buried her face against him, tears spilling quietly. The officer's partner stepped closer, voice low, directed at Matthew but carried over the lodge's microphone feed. Son, if you push this further, it's not just embarrassment you're courting. You're risking charges. And believe me, you don't want to experience this kind of silence. I sat back, calm and steady, the chipped cup warm in my hand. Outside, winter air swirled across the driveway. Inside, the lodge was quiet, protected, and completely mine. Daniel yanked the suitcase back onto the porch with a curse muttered under his breath. He avoided the camera, avoided even glancing at the porch light above, as if the lodge itself might scold him. Robert steadied Claire as she stumbled slightly, and Vanessa walked stiffly beside them, chin high, yet her eyes flitting nervously. Daniel slammed the hatch of the SUV closed, throwing the last bag inside with a force that rattled the frame. One of the officers, shifting slightly without realizing the microphone would carry his voice, spoke quietly. "Ma'am," he said, and his tone was neither pity nor reprimand but recognition. "You've done everything right. Most people don't." The words cut through me like a calm knife. Not an admonishment, not an appeal, they were acknowledgement. On the tablet I watched the family pile into the SUV. The engine coughed, roared, and then the tires spat gravel as the vehicle reversed down the drive, disappearing into the forest. The lodge was still. Sunlight pooled across the wood floors, shadows retreated from the hallways. Faucets were quiet, sensors blinking back to idle, and the house seemed to breathe with the same steady rhythm as my own chest. I leaned back in the chair, holding the chipped cup close, exhaling slowly. My hands shook, not from fear but from release. For years, I had braced for this confrontation, anticipating threats of exile, of being erased from my own home. But today the house had defended itself and the law had defended me. I whispered into the quiet, "Family does not take property hostage." The statement echoed in my mind, firm and unyielding. True. Final. Later that evening my phone buzzed with a county alert. The headline was small, tucked into the local updates section. Monroe family seen leaving Aspen Lodge after property dispute. A grainy photo showed the SUV driving away, Vanessa's face half hidden behind the tinted window. For most, it would be a trivial piece of gossip, a story about greed and entitlement. For me, it was a reminder. Battles are rarely concluded by documents alone. They linger in kitchens, in quiet rooms, in the way people nurse bruised pride. The next morning Ethan called. "They're back at the rental on Pine Street." "It looks bad," he said, voice steady. I didn't ask how he knew. Ethan had ways of knowing. I thanked him and carried the chipped cup to the sink, letting its warmth anchor me. That night I allowed myself to imagine the scene inside the cramped rental. Robert hunched over a fragile folding table, papers scattered around him. His manufacturing job had ended 6 months ago, though pride had kept him silent. Unemployment barely stretched to cover groceries. Claire sat beside him, pale and tired, hand resting lightly against her chest, as though measuring each beat of a heart grown uncertain. Medication lined the counter, bottles with names ending in "n," a quiet testament to a fragile system she could barely hold together. And Vanessa, pacing the small living room, phone in hand, scrolling endlessly through social media. Photos of ski trips, luxury homes, friends living lives she had envied from a distance. She wanted to keep up, to ensure her parents were taken care of, yet the tiny apartment, the lack of security, and the sting of defeat weighed against every swipe of her screen. I sipped from the chipped cup, tasting tea that was no longer bitter. I thought of the lodge, still silent, still mine, and I let the quiet settle around me. My hands rested on the warm ceramic. I had drawn my line, defended what was ours, and for the first time in years, I felt that the weight of fear had lifted. The lodge was safe. I was safe. And though the battle might continue elsewhere, I had already won where it mattered most. Inside myself and inside the home I would never surrender. I sat at the kitchen table, hands curled around my chipped ceramic mug. Steam drifted upward, thin and delicate, and I let the warmth seep back into my fingers. Silence, once heavy with threat, now felt like a room with walls I had built, thick and protective. It was no longer a punishment for speaking. It was my companion, steady and sure. I brought the mug to my lips. The tea was bitter at first, then settled into a quiet warmth. The lamp cast a soft amber glow across the table, slowing everything into focus. A water ring from years past marked the wood. A small nick jutted from the surface, and a stray basil leaf clung stubbornly to the rim of the mug. These imperfections told stories. They told me life had touched this place, left marks that mattered. I listened to my own breathing and to the lodge settling around me. Days of bracing were over. No ringing phones, no music, no intrusion. Quiet had returned, letting small truths rise to the surface. I had done what I feared I couldn't. I had said no. The lodge was mine and it was safe. The papers in my hand confirmed it. My body believed it too. I set the cup down, tracing the thin map of veins on the back of my hand under the winter light. I thought of Thomas, sanding the porch railing at the lodge, murmuring that wood tells you where to press and where to let go. People, he had said, are the same. I had pressed where I needed and let go where it wasn't mine to fix. The mail on the counter waited in a quiet stack. A grocery flyer, a utility bill, a postcard from the library reminding me a book was due. I sorted it methodically, paper sliding over paper, letting the sound soothe me. I placed the trust folder atop the stack, not to boast but to remember. Some victories are carved quietly in signatures and patience. The kettle clicked as it cooled. A car door slammed down the block, tires crunching on gravel. My thoughts drifted to Matthew. The ache in my chest arrived softly, honest and clean. He was my son, my child, before he had learned how to wield threats as though they were tools. The ache didn't demand I act. It asked only that I sit with it, let grief claim a chair at my table. I whispered to the room. Silence, once the space between us, was now my refuge. The only answer it offered was patience. I stood, rinsing the mug, my thumb tracing the crack from rim to base. I dried it with the towel Thomas had always hung crooked, leaving a faint halo of warmth on the table, a reminder that brief heat leaves a mark of kindness. I watered the basil by the window, pinched a sprig and inhaled. Peppery green, alive. On the glass, my breath left a fleeting fog, a tiny cloud that vanished almost as soon as it formed. Ordinary miracles, I thought, are all around. In the hallway I paused at the closet. My hand lingered on the old leather photo album where I had tucked my letter to Thomas. I didn't pull it out, I didn't need to. Its presence was enough. A folded promise between pages, steady as a heartbeat. You don't need to hear to believe. Back at the table, I opened a small notebook and began a list of ordinary tasks. Nothing urgent, nothing grand. Call the library, replace the porch light bulb, oil the back door hinges, drive to Aspen when the road's clear, sit on the porch with tea. I wrote slowly, deliberately, letters that made no apologies for their shape. Silence, once emptiness, now held everything I needed. Tonight, silence was a tool. It carved space for clarity, for calm, for the work I had to do. It softened the edges of anxiety so I could hear reason speak plainly. I felt it in the floor beneath my feet, in the way the air seemed to settle around me without demand. Before heading to bed, I stepped onto the front porch. The night air was sharp and clean, filling my lungs with a steady rhythm. The porch light painted a small circle on the concrete. Beyond it, frost glimmered faintly along the street. I glanced left and right, expecting intrusion, but found only my own composure standing firm. I returned inside, closed the door gently, and turned the deadbolt. Not from fear but from certainty. I was home. That morning, Denver held the quiet that comes after snow has fallen and settled. The sky was pale, almost steel-like, and the scent of winter hung faintly in the air. I carried my leather portfolio under one arm, the one that held every deed, tax form, and trust document linked to the lodge. My boots crunched on the walkway as I headed to Margaret's office, each step purposeful for the first time in months. Margaret's office, a modest corner building with dark reflective windows, smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. She looked up from her desk, glasses perched low on her nose, and greeted me with the calm I had come to rely on. "Evelyn," she said, rising to shake my hand. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "I am. Let's finish this." She motioned toward the conference table. A neat stack of papers sat waiting, corners clipped, tabs marking each place I needed to sign. At the top lay the deed transferring the lodge to the Hope Horizon Foundation, the nonprofit dedicated to retreats for veterans and their families. Seeing it in front of me, precise and unyielding on the page, made the decision tangible. I slid into the chair, folder beside me. Margaret folded her hands across the table. "Once you sign, Evelyn, the lodge becomes theirs. But your life estate clause guarantees you full access for as long as you live. No one, Matthew included, can interfere. It's airtight." I touched the pen. This wasn't losing the lodge. It was deciding who it would serve next. Margaret's approving smile reassured me. "That's it. You're not surrendering. You're directing it forward." The pen moved across the first line, my signature steadier than I expected. With each stroke, the weight pressing on my chest began to lift. Not the sorrow, not the sting of Matthew's betrayal, but the months of gnawing uncertainty that had shadowed me. By the third signature, my hand was steady. By the fifth, satisfaction bloomed quietly, deeply. Margaret guided me through the final steps. Trust reinforcements, the gift deed, the letter of donative intent. At last came the clause I had waited for, the one granting me lifetime access. He tapped it lightly. "This ensures the lodge remains yours to use, to breathe in, to remember Thomas. They cannot touch that." I signed, settled back, and let the room's quiet absorb me. For a moment, all that existed was the soft hum of the heating vent and the scratch of Margaret filing the papers. "It's done," she said. I exhaled slowly. "So if Matthew tries another lawyer, he'll hit an immovable wall," she added. "Family emotion can't bend the law. You've protected the lodge as firmly as possible." And for the first time in a long while, I felt fully, undeniably in control. I nodded and reached into my bag, drawing out the small, cracked ceramic cup I carried like a talisman. I set it gently on the table, letting its weight remind me of resilience. This cup, fractured yet whole, reflected the lodge itself. It had been tested, strained by betrayal, but now it was secured in a way no one, not even Matthew, could undo. Margaret's eyes softened as she watched me cradle it. "That's a remarkable way to see it," she said. I held it close. Richard had often said, "A home isn't just where you live, it's what you protect." Today I had protected it. Not for Matthew, not even for myself, but for the people who would walk through its doors seeking calm and sanctuary rather than ownership or entitlement. When the last document was notarized and filed, Margaret handed me an envelope. "These are yours," she said. "Keep them safe. This is your shield now." I tucked the envelope carefully into my portfolio and rose. My legs felt rooted, strong in a way they hadn't in months. Stepping outside, the crisp Denver air pressed against my coat, sharp but cleansing. For so long I had believed the only choices were surrender or battle. Today I understood a third path. Define the terms yourself. They had tried to erase me from my own property. Instead, I had written myself firmly into its future, in ink that no storm could wash away. Back in the car, I let the engine idle and watched my breath cloud the windshield. The phone beside me remained silent. I knew Matthew would call eventually, pleading, demanding, maybe even begging. But the papers were filed, the transfer irrevocable. His words would strike only the wall of law, unyielding and absolute. I whispered to myself, letting the words settle like stone. I hadn't lost the lodge. I had chosen its next chapter. The lesson felt permanent, a line I would carry long after the storm passed. Later, as dusk softened Denver's light, a knock came at the door. My chest tightened, anticipation sharp but contained. Through the glass I saw him, Matthew alone, shoulders hunched against the evening chill. No Vanessa, no Robert or Claire, just the son I had once held as a boy, now a man who had nearly erased me from the life I had built. I opened the door slowly. He did not speak immediately. His eyes flicked past me into the living room, landing on the small round table where my cracked ceramic cup rested. I could see the recognition in the way his throat worked, a swallow that betrayed the gravity of the moment. "Mom," he said finally, voice rough, uneven. I thought you'd always choose me." I let the silence hold. In another life I might have rushed to soothe him, to erase his discomfort. Not tonight. My hand rested lightly on the doorframe, steady. "Matthew," I said quietly. "I did choose you. Every time I wrote a check, said yes, carried you through life's moments, I was choosing you. But love without boundaries is not love, it's fear. And I am done living in fear." He shook his head, tears welling, jaw tight with disbelief. I didn't think you'd actually stop me." I stepped back, letting him see me fully, no door between us. "I didn't stop you to punish you. I stopped you because if I allowed it, you would never learn where the line is. I chose to teach you what boundaries mean, so that someday when you are wise enough you can create your own." His gaze dropped to the scuffed floorboards, tracing faint trails carved by years of footsteps. When he finally looked up again, tears ran freely down his cheeks, and I saw in them a glimmer of understanding. It wasn't a flood of anger or despair, not the kind that demanded comfort, but a quiet, heavy recognition. "I never thought you'd shut the door on me," Matthew murmured. I let out a slow breath. "I didn't shut the door," I said. "I simply marked where the doorway is. You'll choose if and how you step through it." He rubbed the back of his neck the way he used to as a teenager, caught in mischief, unsure how to face the consequences. For a brief stretch, the space between us wasn't mother and adult son. It was mother and boy again. A boy who had run too far into darkness and had yet to find his way home. The silence lingered, thick but not hostile. I poured meaning into it, letting him feel the weight of it. Finally he looked up, voice breaking. "I was wrong, Mom." I did not rush to answer. The old reflex would have grabbed those words like lifeline, but tonight I let them settle. The last I spoke. "You hurt me. And you'll need to find your own way to repair what you broke." His shoulders sagged. A tear slid down his cheek and he wiped it quickly with the back of his hand. "Hearing that, it matters," he said, voice low. "I don't expect you to forgive me now." "You don't need to expect it," I replied. "Forgiveness is a door I'll open if and when it's right. What matters is that you stop trying to break the lock." We stood there, tethered by blood, separated by choices, but still bound by something quieter, harder to name. Not reconciliation, not yet, but a small crack, an opening for light. "Will I ever see the lodge again?" he asked, voice soft now. I glanced at the cup on the table, the thin crack glinting faintly in the dusk. "The lodge isn't yours to claim anymore. I made sure of that. But one day when you understand what home truly means, you may stand somewhere of your own and see why I did this. That will be enough." Matthew nodded, lips pressed tight. He lingered only long enough for me to see his tears fall once more. Then quietly he turned toward his car. I did not move after him. My hand rested on the doorframe, watching until the taillights disappeared into the fading Denver light. I whispered softly, to no one in particular, not to him, not to Richard, not even to myself, but to the stillness around me. "The door is here. He'll know where to find it." Then I closed it, not in finality but in truth. The mountain air smelled crisp, clean. Patches of late snow clung to the pine branches as I turned into the lodge driveway. A banner hung across the porch rail, Hope Horizon Foundation. A folding table held silver urns of coffee and paper cups lined neatly. A handful of staff stood bundled in jackets and knit caps, cheeks flushed from the cold. The lodge itself looked timeless, cedar and stone catching the light just right, the porch ready, welcoming in its quiet way. Dana Ortiz waited at the steps, hands tucked into her coat, hair gathered low. She was the foundation's program director, a woman whose gaze took in a room as precisely as a nurse reads a patient's vital signs. Her smile carried quiet steadiness, and it told me immediately that I had placed the lodge in capable hands. "Miss Harper," she said warmly, "thank you for making the trip. Thank you for making this place matter." I returned her smile. Inside, a few board members lingered near the mantel with tubes of certificates, while volunteers arranged chairs into a loose semicircle. A young man fussed with a microphone that refused to cooperate, his brow furrowed, and the room hummed with the calm, purposeful energy of people preparing to make a difference. The lodge welcomed them with quiet ease. My fingers brushed the banister Thomas had once sanded smooth, and then I let them fall, leaving the memory behind. This day belonged to the foundation and I had chosen it be intimate, simple. Dana greeted everyone with measured words about rest, about repair. No fanfare, no donor spotlights, just the purpose of the space made clear. A chaplain offered a gentle blessing, inclusive enough for anyone present. The county records already held the transfer, the papers tucked in my bag like a silent engine. Justice often works quietly without applause. Dana invited me to speak. I had never been one for speeches, but a few sentences emerged naturally. I told them the lodge had been built by hands guided by love and patience, weathering storms that left marks in the wood and in hearts. I said a home survives through the boundaries that protect it, and that today was not about loss. It was about direction. My words were simple, unornamented, and that was enough. After the polite clapping faded, Dana took my arm and led me to the front door. Beside it a small plaque gleamed, brushed steel on cedar. The inscription read, "Given by Evelyn Harper in memory of Thomas Harper. May this lodge be a space of quiet healing." I traced the first letter of my name and felt a quiet ache, not sorrow but acknowledgement. We moved through the rooms together. I showed her the kitchen drawer that sticks in damp weather, the shelf where tea warms just enough without touching the stove. I pointed out where morning sunlight strikes in winter and the floorboards that groan after a long day. Dana took notes with care as though tending to a living, breathing thing. In truth, that's what this house had become. Outside on the porch, the weather lifted enough for us to sit. I brought out my chipped ceramic cup and held it as the wind rustled through the pines. Dana's gaze lingered on the cup, then on me, in a way that needed no explanation. "Mrs. Harper," she said softly, "we women give so much and often get erased. Today you gave, but you were not erased." Her words struck deep. I thought of Matthew on my doorstep, of Vanessa's measured defiance, of Robert lugging his suitcase, and Claire with her hand pressed to her chest. I thought of the deputies who had assured me I had done everything right, of Margaret sliding the trust documents across the table, and of Ethan marking wires with careful precision. I thought of Thomas on this same porch, cup in hand, reminding me that the house would endure long past our days. Dana's line did not change the past, but it framed it. I nodded, letting it settle. Below the porch, the lake reflected the pale winter sun where the ice had broken into a ragged oval. The wind lifted the strands of hair at my temple. From the kitchen, a volunteer's laugh rang out as they figured out the tricky coffee burner. The lodge was already at work, quietly holding its people, generous without expectation. Dana spoke of the first group planned for spring. Couples, a mother and daughter learning to speak again, 2 brothers who held their breath as they slept. She said occupancy would remain small, the schedule loose, allowing space for walks, naps and silence. I told her the trail along the south ridge carried the sweetest scent of pine after rain. She wrote it down carefully like a prescription. A volunteer stepped out to snap a photo for the foundation's website, capturing a lodge that had begun to fulfill its new purpose. A quiet sanctuary held steady by memory, care, and intention. I've never been one for photographs, but I stood with Dana on the porch and let the camera click. In my hands was the chipped cup I carried everywhere, a small anchor against memory. Perhaps it made me look like someone guarding a talisman, but maybe I am. As the guests departed and the banner came down, I lingered on the porch. Dana returned carrying 2 paper cups, offering one to me. We sipped quietly, letting the chill press against our cheeks. She asked if I'd come back when no groups were scheduled, and I told her I would. The life estate clause in the deed was more than ink. It was permission to continue living here, to keep breathing in a place that held so much of our story. I would honor it not by hiding away but by being present. The lodge looked the same and yet entirely different. Ownership had shifted, but the heart of the place had not. The foundation held the keys. I held my name where it mattered. I sat with that contradiction and felt it settle gently. Before leaving, Dana pressed a small envelope into my hands. Inside was a note on the foundation's letterhead. Nothing legal, just words. Thank you for trusting us. We will carry the story forward with care. A promise that asked nothing in return, rare and pure. At my car I paused for one last look. The porch light had not yet flicked on. The windows reflected the winter sky. I held the cup, thinking of every morning Thomas and I had spent here, talking about nothing that became everything. I whispered the line I had repeated in my mind for weeks. Only now it felt less like a defense and more like design. I did not lose the lodge. I chose who would have it. The wind rippled across the lake as if in agreement. I placed the cup in the holder and started the engine, the car winding through pines that had seen decades of our lives. For a moment I drove slowly, letting the lodge shrink in the rear view. Then I faced forward, pressed the pedal and felt the road guide me. The porch chair had always held me steady. Its cedar arms smooth beneath my palms, the mountain air crisp and thin, late light spilling gold across the boards. The brushed steel plaque caught the light, given in memory of Thomas Harper. May this lodge be a quiet kind of healing. I read it once, then again, feeling something inside me unclench, not loudly but finally. I returned the cup to the porch rail, watching steam curl into the cold evening. The lake lay below like a sheet of soft metal, pines leaning and settling back into stillness. Somewhere inside, a volunteer laughed at a stubborn coffee burner. The sound drifted out and disappeared into the evening air. The lodge breathed like it had always been alive. It just needed boundaries to keep its rhythm steady. I thought of Thomas sitting beside me on this same porch, his knee brushing mine, waiting for me to hand him tea. He would point to the ridge and tell me where weather was gathering. He had believed a porch could heal if you lingered long enough. I hadn't understood then how a house could teach you to stand firm, to hold your ground. Now I did. I touched the plaque with 2 fingers, the way one touches the name of someone they love on cool stone. The words were plain, almost stern. Quiet kind of healing. No fanfare, no applause, just space to breathe after the noise fades. I thought of the deputy in the driveway that day, glancing at the camera and saying, "Ma'am, you've done everything right. Most people don't." I hadn't known I needed a stranger to say that, but I did. His words released a weight I had carried for years. The kitchen drawer would still stick in damp weather, the lodge would still creak and sigh, but it was ours, anchored and enduring just as it had always been. The west-facing window still caught the first light in winter, spilling it across the floor where it had for decades. The shelf I keep my tea on remained cool just as it always did. Dana recorded these small details as if she were prescribing care, while Margaret had already transformed the larger protections into law and statute. Her pen made permanence from air, turning authority into shelter. Ethan had given the lodge a voice of its own, so it could speak with clarity when mine felt too tired. Each of them had shaped love into action, into work. That is the love I understand. I thought of the letter tucked into the leather album back home. The one that begins with Thomas's name and ends with my initial. It lies folded between photographs scented faintly of cedar and summer mornings that will never return. I do not need to read it again. Writing it was the work. Its truth had guided me here. Saying no is not a denial of care. It is the form care takes when fear has been set aside. A wind shifted across the lake and the surface shimmered with silver. My hand wrapped around the cup, drawing warmth back into my fingers. Matthew might appear one day standing at the foot of these stairs. Perhaps he will keep his distance, perhaps he will ask nothing. Or perhaps he will ask for something I cannot give. I have no rehearsed answer. The door is not closed. It is no longer revolving. He can come as my son, not as a claimant. He can bring questions, not threats. To sit here and breathe, he must earn understanding of what a threshold means. Inside, small acts of kindness were already taking shape. A timer signaled that cookies were done. Someone thanked the baker. The lodge was quietly alive with attention and care. Ownership had shifted, but purpose remained. Purpose endures when the names on paper change. I let that thought settle in my chest, letting it warm my shoulders. I rose and stepped to the edge of the porch. The first two boards creaked in their familiar, honest way. I looked down at the gravel where an SUV had once stopped, where fear had tried to become force. The gravel looked ordinary again, and that felt right. This is not a place for memorials to conflict. It is for the ordinary holy things. Sleep, coffee, the slow, clear breath you take after setting a heavy burden down. I lifted the cup, took a careful sip, and savored the faint sting on my tongue. Peace does not arrive on trumpets. It arrives in filings and signatures, in neighbors who watch with quiet care, in a lawyer whose resolve is steadier than words of sympathy, in a foundation that holds a story without dropping it. It arrives as the calm to remain still when someone bangs on your door with ultimatums. It arrives as a slow, owned smile. I looked once more at the plaque and spoke aloud so the lodge could hear it too. I do not need triumph in loudness. I only need the certainty that I kept my peace, through paperwork, through wisdom, through the deliberate quiet of my own hands. And as the sun set behind the pines, I whispered to the wind, sometimes miracles do not knock. They wait patiently in silence until you are ready to open your heart.